Alrighty, I guess we can get started with our icebreaker activity. I will go ahead and pull it up. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Just making sure. Quick check-in. Okay, awesome. All right, so our icebreaker is right here. So feel free to do this on mobile, but I will say it is better on the desktop for most people because it is a Fig Jam activity. So our board members will go ahead and pop that into the chat so you can join. And sorry ahead of time, but we will be spamming it since we'll have like a lot of attendees joining every few minutes. So we want to make sure everyone has access to that Fig Jam. But we also have that QR code here if you want to join on your phone. Alrighty, and so once you've landed on that Fig Jam, we have our first activity here, and Jamie will go ahead and share some instructions.
Oh, I'm unmuted already. Yay. Okay, so yeah, so you can find these +1s and 100s and I'm sorry. You can take any of these blank sticky notes and add your own in any of these categories of when are some times you've had to influence a decision without having formal authority to do it, or what does design leadership look like without people management? And, we already have some examples here, like for the second one, mentoring, influencing roadmaps, cross-team alignments, design systems leadership. So feel free to stick your own in to some of these blank ones or drag some of these +1s or 100s over to ones that are already there if you agree with them. And the second one right below it is called Which Path Feels Closest to You Right Now? So you can pop your name in any one of the sticky notes and then drag over one of the icons that kind of represents what path you're feeling closest to right now. If you don't see one, you can feel free to make one. And the one below that is what feels the hardest about growing past senior designer into staff designer. So you can pick any of these overarching categories and put a little star next to it if you feel like it kind of represents how you feel. And for anyone that's new to Fig Jam, if you're having a hard time copying over any of the draggable items, I'm going to be creating little copies at the bottom of the legend icon. You can just drag any of those if you see that you like them over. I'll just keep making some duplicates for those that need them.
I love these combos. Daisy is an aspiring staff designer and also still figuring it out. Love the emojis. Taylor says, I just want to say my cat is sitting next to me and is entranced by all the cursors flying around in Big Jam. That's very funny. Hello and welcome to everyone who's just joining. We're doing an icebreaker activity for the next few minutes, and we've put the link in the chat, so feel free to hop in and join. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions.
Oh, I'm seeing a lot of people putting +1s for advocating for accessibility and having to convince PMs. That is very real.
Relatable, yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll just about start wrapping up the icebreaker, but thank you so much everyone for participating. Love all of these reactions. I think this one is so important, managing up. I think like before I entered my first full-time role, I had no idea this concept existed, and it's so important to advocate for yourself and, set those boundaries and communicate, whatever's needed in your relationship with your manager. A lot of career path switchers. That's awesome. I think that's what makes UX such a beautiful community because we have people from all different backgrounds and expertise.
Oh, I love when someone wrote in for what does design leadership without people management look like? Someone wrote developing standards and processes. That's a huge one that I think gets overlooked a lot. It takes a lot of foresight and a lot of leadership skills to be able to kind of develop those things. So that was a good one.
Okay, awesome. I will go ahead and transition over to the slide deck that we have prepared. But thank you so much, everyone, again, for participating, and for all those who have just joined. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining tonight. Super excited to be having Catt here today. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And also, if you're interested in accessing this icebreaker after the event, we will also be sending that out. So, all right. So just an introduction to Philly Kai. So what is Philly Kai? Who are we? So Philly Kai is a 100% volunteer-run interdisciplinary group. And so we are the local Philadelphia chapter of the ACM, so the Association for Computing Machinery's Special Interest Group in Computer-Human Interaction. I know that's a mouthful, but we are Philadelphia's largest UX community. And we are very passionate about strengthening the UX community here in Philadelphia through low cost and accessible educational programming and networking opportunities. So we run both virtual events like this one and also in-person pop events. Just a few weeks ago, we had a really wonderful UX trivia night at Ace Outpost Philadelphia. And so we do like little meetups like that, and it's a lot of fun. So we're very dedicated to our work. We're very dedicated to our culture of knowledge sharing and community building. So I'll introduce myself. So my name is Hannah V. Nguyen, and I am the board chair of Philly Kai for 2026, and I'll hand it off to Jamie.
Hey everyone, I'm Jamie, I'm your vice chair, and I will hand it off to Rashida.
Sorry, my mic was not like discoverable because I had the icebreaker open. I am Rakshita and I'm the secretary for Philly Guide this year, and I work with Urban Outfitters. So hi, and I'm a UX researcher. I'll popcorn it to Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Rashida. Nancy Barr, I am the community coordinator for Philly Kai on the board, trying to focus more on growth and growing our presence in the different communities. Nice to meet everyone. Oh, sorry, I had to hand it to Cecilia. Sorry.
You're good. Hi everyone, I'm Cecilia and I'm the current social media coordinator. And I'll hand it off to Dwani.
Hi everyone, I'm Dwani. I'm the mentorship volunteer coordinator, and I am looking to this amazing talk and network with everyone tonight. Hope you all have a good time with Kat today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And yes, and we do want to put out a disclaimer that we support a very safe and positive environment for us to come together and like learn from events like these. So if you happen to witness any unacceptable behavior, please feel free to private message one of us board members in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much. And we're very excited to have Kat today. We do have some upcoming events, and one of those is our Design Slam. So every year we do a Design Slam that's typically part of Comcast's Philly Tech Week. And so this is a very exciting opportunity for designers and developers to come together and kind of ideate solutions with our nonprofit partner. So last year we partnered with Code for Philly's Benefits Decision Toolkit to help resolve one of their service design problems, and it was a really great time. So we're super excited to share more information very, very soon in early May. So keep an eye out for that. And we have a Discord as well that you can join, and we'll be sending the link to join our online community very soon. And we're also very excited to share that we will be sharing a copy of Catt's book, The Staff Designer, Grow, Influence, and Lead as an Individual Contributor. So stay till the end for sure. We don't want to miss the opportunity to possibly win. So we'll announce a raffle winner at the end of this event. All right, and huge thank you to our sponsors. So one of our sponsors is actually Rosenfeld Media, who is the publisher for Catt's book. Rosenfeld has been a huge supporter over the past few years, providing us with books to share out to our community members, as well as Bentley Systems, the Judge Group, and Thomas Jefferson University. Alrighty, and I'll hand it over to Jamie. And yeah, we're super excited to kickstart this talk. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So Kat, if you wanted to go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah.
Hello, thanks for having me, folks. Happy to be here. You should all be able to see my screen. But yeah, let me know if you can't see the presentation for some reason. And also, I'm the type of person who loves the chat, so feel free to reflect or react if you see anything that is hyper relevant to you or relatable or anything like that. Please definitely, of course, let me know in the chat. And if you have any questions, I believe they'll be looking as well, because at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you also have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll keep track. Amazing. Hello, I'm Kat. I'm again really grateful to be here. Thanks to the Philly Kai folks for having me. I have been at Dropbox at this point. I'm a staff product designer. I've been at Dropbox for 3 years now, which is wild. And before that, I worked at Etsy. I worked at Asana, SoundCloud, NASDAQ. Those are like the larger names, but I've also worked at some smaller startups and at an agency as well. 2026 is actually my 16th year as a professional designer, which is wild. We're just not going to think about that one. But yeah, it's been a fun journey. And over time, I've gone from junior to mid to senior to staff. When I was going from senior to staff, I definitely experienced a whole bunch of confusion about like, what even is this job? What does it mean to get to the next level? And I want to today share some of the things that I've learned during my own transition and also during the process of writing a book about that transition and how to advocate for this role. We'll get into that a little bit. We'll talk also about succeeding as somebody who's at that level, along with what the future of IC design leadership looks like. And I do want to, of course, call out that, like, this hopefully will be something that helps you understand where you could go in the future. There's no pressure. There's no need to immediately tomorrow be like, okay, I'm gonna, try to push for staff. Like, this is a long path. Having a career ideally is a longer time thing, not hopefully too long. We all want to retire at some point, obviously. But it's a journey, so it's more about like the overall journey than just the destinations, those milestones. So it is okay. I just want to call out, if you are feeling like tired and like just overwhelmed, you don't have to grow all the time, but this can give you a little bit more clarity, I hope, into the future potentially of what you could do, so that you understand what the world might look like for you after senior. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So again, I mentioned this, but essentially these insights are going to come from a book that I wrote, which is called The Staff Designer: Grow, Influence, and Lead as an IC. I wrote this book because I didn't have a resource, as I mentioned, when I was going from senior to staff. I made a lot of mistakes. And essentially, after making a bunch of those mistakes, having a lot of conversations with people, I realized that it would be useful to create a guide that gathers knowledge from across the industry, along with my own personal experience, and essentially turn it into something that could help other people. So I interviewed 28 design professionals. So that's staff designers as well as the senior leaders who manage them. I also reviewed 75 staff level job descriptions from companies that include Microsoft, Atlassian, Intuit, Etsy, where I used to work, Intercom, PayPal, Discord, a bunch of places. And I also have taught a huge number at this point, over 200 students in a variety of cohorts of the course that is on the same subject. When I was writing the book, I think I got to the fourth cohort by the time that the manuscript was finished. So those first several cohorts did go into the book as well. And a lot of the questions and the content has been refined through those conversations. And ultimately, the book is 211 pages, which is wild. At the end, I'll make sure to give you a discount code. And then, yes, one person will win their own personal copy. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure to note that what you are going to be hearing is a lot of this is based on this book. And there's so much more that we just don't have time to get into that's in there. That said, we're going to just jump in and see how far we get. Okay, so first is expectations. So when it comes to being a staff designer is essentially more than senior. And I really like this quote from my friend Jess Dale, who has managed a variety of staff designers and senior designers as well. Essentially, Jess said, staff designers help the team move from a state of ambiguity into a state of clarity. So, as a staff designer, I am usually working on a major initiative that probably is a pretty chunky section of a product or maybe a product itself. And I'm thinking end to end, how does this experience work? So it might feel similar to senior, but it's actually usually one layer above. And I'll try to explain that in a little bit more detail. But essentially, I'm trying to partner with my product leaders. I'm working with directors as well, usually, and we're trying to reduce risk and increase confidence in major strategic initiatives. So ultimately, I'm giving the team direction and actually illustrating what we're going to be moving toward. I'm kind of filling the roadmap, and then I'm taking a pretty big chunk of work within that plan, and then I'm probably actually helping to ship it. So what that ends up looking like is that I'm actually jumping, between the forest and the trees. So like I'm still doing a lot of actual shipping of design work, but then I'm also thinking more strategically, like what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And then I'm actually executing. So it's kind of like shifting up and down. So it does end up essentially like one of the major differences is that with a senior designer, usually they're just taking the work and then shipping it, or like taking a chunk of work and just saying, okay, cool, this was already defined and I'm delivering it. But the level above that is saying what actually goes in the roadmap and is actually like advocating for work that should or shouldn't be in there and contributing to the strategic direction of the product area. Maybe if it's a smaller company, the product, for example, maybe they're pushing for like new product areas or initiatives as well. So they're a much heavier strategic contributor. Staff designers are using all kinds of artifacts to help create this clarity. So that might be, things you're very familiar with, like architectural diagrams. It might be, visual designs and mock-ups. Now we're seeing a lot more prototyping, things like that as well, which is great. Actually, like when I was getting into product design, we were doing a lot more like code-based prototyping, and now we're kind of like back to that, which is really cool. And then there's also usually a fair amount of system style documentation because, as I said, you might be taking a chunk of the work and delivering it, but there's going to be other people probably in parallel, especially at larger companies, who are also working with you to deliver toward that vision. So you often need to actually create documentation that helps other people to deliver like you. And I did actually see some people kind of allude to this in the icebreaker as well. So I want to shout out to some of the folks who mentioned that staff designers are often also IC role models. They're like raising the bar of design quality. They're often reviewing the work of other people and making sure that the work, it meets the standard. And they're probably like raising the floor almost by doing this documentation that I mentioned as well. So they're really modeling what great craft looks like and pushing the thinking of their peers. When it comes to succeeding in the role, there were a lot of threads that came through the conversations. I think I'm going to talk through some of the major themes that I heard, and hopefully you'll get to see or check out more if you grab a copy of the book. But one of the big things is how critical it is to become an expert at managing your own time. Because that's really the only way that you can get so many things done. So people are going to be constantly pinging you for suggestions, advice. What should we do next? Do you have time to look over this one thing? Do you have time to take this project on, et cetera, et cetera? And you need to have a strong relationship with your calendar. You need to have a strong perspective on the most important next thing to do with your time, because a lot of people are going to be requesting it. And that makes sense because you're somebody who has the ability to make a lot of impact. So people are going to be asking that of you for the area that they care about. So what usually people at this level will do, shout outs to my friend Yoko Sakao Ohama for kind of alluding to this, is that you have to set expectations with people rather than just doing what you're told. So if a PM comes to you and says, "Hey, can you like do these slides for me really quick?" or whatever, like you have to actually say, how important is that in comparison to this other thing? Like I think this is critical that I do this, but like I can't do it today. Like I have other things that are more important. I could get to you by, next week. Is it that critical? You can also have conversations with people and treat it as more of a discussion or a negotiation. So, you can share like, okay, I'm working on this particular thing right now. Is this other request actually like more important than that? Because I'm willing to stop and I'm willing to go do this other thing, but you have to inform people of the trade-offs. And people are often willing to have that discussion. Yoko does this because essentially you're going to need to focus your energy and you're going to need to be optimizing for impact at pretty much all times. So you want people to understand when things will actually happen, but you don't want them to be just telling you essentially what to do because you have a perspective on how you should be spending your time. So in a lot of conversations with people, as I said, I'll kind of like set reasonable expectations about, these are my priorities at the moment. Some people actually will, at the beginning of the week, for example, say, hey, these are my priorities that I'm hoping to get done by the end of the week. If you have stand-ups or rituals like that, that can also be used for the purpose of creating visibility into your work. Those are definitely tools that I would recommend. And in the book, I actually discuss a lot about tools that you can use for the purpose of time management. So if you want to dig further into that, I would definitely recommend checking out the book as well. The other thing that was a common thread was the critical importance of relationship building. So, the reason that this is so important to people is because as a person who doesn't have direct authority, you have zero ability to actually like pressure somebody to do something because there aren't really that many consequences if you can't fire somebody or anything like that. And you shouldn't be, using that kind of power for that purpose anyway. But you have to really invest in your working relationships because people have to trust you because that's the only way that you're actually going to get things done. So relationships are essentially the foundation that helps people to gain influence. And I like this quote from Micah, who is a staff product designer. Micah is working, I think, at Figma at this moment. Essentially, like influence is when your perspective on things is well regarded. It's when people trust your word. It's when people are talking about your work or your ideas when you're not in the room. That's what you're looking for. And the only way to really do that is, again, by talking to people and building those connections. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. But you'll often hear people in leadership positions, if you're trying to go from senior to staff, they'll say, "Oh, you need more influence." It's challenging to really understand what that is, so I'll try my best to like very lightly break down what they're referring to. Essentially, like what they're talking about is I like this reference to this thing called like the locus of control, which is you have things that you can directly modify. So maybe that is, for example, the prototype that you're working on. Maybe you're like vibe coding something and you just want to tell Claude, like, hey, can you change this thing? Right? Like that is something you can directly do. Something you can influence, maybe depending on the relationship with your product manager, is okay, well, like, can we go the more complex route that happens to be a better user experience for our customers? Or do we have to go the simpler route because it's faster, but long term it has worse effects? If you have a good relationship with your product manager, then yes, you can actually influence that person. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get more people into that second ring versus the outer ring. So sometimes if you sit down and you actually think about your relationships, you'll realize like, oh, my PM's really stubborn. They're highly opinionated. We just started working together. I actually have no ability to control that particular situation or that conversation. So I'm actually in the outer ring on that particular subject, and I need more time, and I need to start investing in moving the PM from that outer ring into the influence ring when it comes to user experience decisions. So if you can do that, and that just takes a lot of time and conversations, and you'll start to notice maybe your PM consults you on certain things like UX related questions, for example. If you start seeing those signals, that your perspective is more well regarded, then that means that you might be able to influence a person on certain things. So the more people you can get into the influence ring, it means that you have more power potentially. But we start talking about things like social capital and all of that too. So essentially, like influence is something that you can spend or that you have to gain and you have to maintain it over time. But yeah, this is like a really critical part of the job because again, like a lot of the work that you're doing is through other people and you're advocating, and there's ways to advocate that are more useful or less useful. And if you're curious about more of that in particular, I'm going to be talking about this a lot in a workshop that's going to happen next month. It's going to be about persuasion and influence for IC designers. It's on May 8th. It's 2 hours of just diving really deep into how influence works. And we're going to practice techniques for actually creating compelling pitches. And we're going to figure out like who do you have strong relationships with, who don't you have strong relationships with. And you're going to end up leaving with a 30-day plan to begin building more influence in your role. Highly recommend spending time on this, whether it's reading about it, which I write a lot about in the book, or if you want to like do this workshop together, happy to also dig into that there. Basically, the high level version of how you start building this influence is again relationships, and one simple way to do that is to go just talk to people who you notice have a lot of influence. So people who are in meetings, who if they say something, people listen and they're like, oh, that's a really good idea. If you notice those people who their ideas are getting taken over and over again and actually implemented, those are people that you might want to start to talk to and honestly just ask them questions about their perspective. So how do they like what do they care about? How did they go about kind of getting to where they are? If you ask people things like that, what their goals are, a lot of people will actually just tell you. And curiosity is really something super duper critical. So I would definitely recommend just dropping like a 30-minute one-to-one on the calendar of people you notice are really influential, and they may surprise you. The other thing that you can immediately start to do is if you notice that there are people who are really against certain things that you've suggested, you can actually just reach out to those people. And why I'm saying that is I actually had a conversation with this other designer named Edwin who was at Datadog. I think he's at Jane Street at this point. And essentially, he had a conversation with this one engineer who was a staunch anti of one of the projects that he was proposing. And he got feedback from this person. They met. Essentially, he just asked, hey, can we talk for like 30 minutes? This person gave really good feedback to him, and they ended up doing a huge pivot. And through that process of doing that pivot, when that feedback was integrated, that person was actually converted to an advocate. And so, through that process, again, of being curious and open and having conversation, you can actually learn what matters to people. And even if somebody seems like they're really against your ideas, if you start to integrate what their feedback is, they may actually turn and become advocates and, be more influenceable in the future. So highly recommend that. One other thing that's really critical is to make sure that you are proactively sharing updates with the people around you. So it's important to essentially be communicating the messy middle. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think with your peers and with people who don't do design work, it's because it creates visibility into how design work works. Because a lot of people actually think that design work is just vibe coding, which we're seeing a lot of conversation about right now, right? Like it's just make the mock-up to them. But we know that it's actually a lot of critical thinking. It is a lot of learning about insights and then connecting those insights to particular decisions that are made and creating meaning out of all of the mess. And so by sharing proactive updates, you can help people understand that, but then you can also start to manage upward. And that's also something that's really important to be doing quite often because, especially when you get to the staff level, but also this happened to me at senior, I think I thought that my manager was going to be really aware of my work without me having to do anything. But it turns out that they're really busy people. Managers are overwhelmed a lot of the time. They are context switching quite often. They're jumping between meeting to meeting to meeting with barely any time to actually sit down and reflect on what's happening. And so the more that you are actually letting them know upfront what's going on, they can actually help you. The other thing that's important is to make sure that you are coming to them with more of a plan. So I think I also saw somebody say that. Yes, inform, don't just ask for permission. I think that's a really critical takeaway or something that you should consider how to do. And the way that I personally like to do this is I still want to give managers the choice ultimately, but I want to provide a proposal to them. So say that I'm thinking about what I might work on as the next project that I want to take on, I will come with a perspective about several options that I could do and provide my recommendation and explain why I think I should maybe do this particular project, but also say, hey, you let me know if you have a different perspective, and I'm happy to do something else. And that gives them the ability to still choose at the end of the day, but I'm letting them know that I have an opinion and I'm giving them the ability to essentially just say yes if they want to. So, highly recommend that. And then sharing any impact that you have based on the decisions that you make, closing the loop as often as you can. I think those are really critical things to do. And now we live in a world where essentially like all of our notes are being taken for us and things like that. And you can like reference a lot of those loose tasks, that you maybe would have dropped before. But I would definitely recommend thinking about how you can close the loop as often as possible on work that's open or conversations that were open. And that's how you also start to build trust with your manager. So I want to shout out another book that's not my book. It's called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And this was a book that I read when I first became a staff designer. So I also would recommend this book. There are some parts of it that are a little bit corny, but this I think was something that was really valuable for me, and it's been valuable for other people that have also read the book. Essentially, it asks, instead of saying that things are happening to you, what would it mean for you to make things happen? And so this is something that was explored in the book itself. I also wanted to call it out because it came up a number of times in the interviews that I had, this concept of claiming your agency. So I think when you're senior, a lot of times you can kind of just like hang out and be told what to do. At least like that is the reflection that a lot of people gave to me, that it was like very possible to sit at that level for a long time, and that often the shift that is necessary to go from senior to staff is that you actually want to chart your own path a little bit more, and you're comfortable with the ambiguity and the agency that or the freedom that kind of comes with that, for all of the discomfort that you might have that can come from being able to make your own decisions. So I would really consider, if you want to go from senior to staff, what are ways, again, that you can provide more of your perspective? Of course, still give leadership the chance to consent or to say, no, we want to go in a different direction, but how can you be more proactive in conversations? Finally, something else I wanted to say about succeeding is that I just want to really make sure to underscore that you need to make sure that you keep a running list of your achievements and the effects of those achievements on the business. This is something that's really valuable for conversations with your manager. It's also just valuable in general for communicating the value of design, which I think is only getting more and more important because, like people think that design is just prototyping, and it's a lot more than that. So the more that you can share the impact of the work that you're doing, how certain artifacts that you've created or certain work that you've done have contributed meaningfully to the business and the results that have come from it, those are really important, and it actually underscores the value of design. So definitely a bunch of that comes through in the course as well. I will make sure to drop links at the end of this as well. And yes, we will make sure that this also gets shared out later. Okay, on to the future. I want to talk about this really lightly. Essentially, I've talked about staff and kind of the difference between senior and staff. There is a level that is above staff. This is called different things at different companies, so I didn't mention this earlier, but essentially different companies call these levels different things. So some companies did call the level above senior they called it principal, but most companies that I was looking at called it staff. So that's why the book title and everything else is called staff designer, because the level above senior is most commonly referred to now as staff. Before it was referred to as principal, but now the level above staff is usually being referred to either as principal or sometimes it's called senior staff. And I get into this in heavy detail in the book itself. But yeah, essentially there's a level that's above staff. So if you feel like you get to a point where you're cool with designing the roadmap and like defining what goes in that, and you want to go even higher up into the stratosphere, that is becoming more and more possible. It's usually at bigger companies that have been around for 10, maybe 15, 20 years. So like the Yahoos of the world. Etsy has a couple of people who are at this level, like eBay, PayPal. I've seen some job positions for like a principal designer. Dropbox has a couple of principal designers. These are people who are often like helping to make really huge decisions. So this is people who might be literally helping leaders define like what business strategies we should be leaning into. They have really gnarly problems that are caused by like legacy work. So like Adobe has principal designers. You might be thinking about like what is the future of the company and like what is our business model going to be in the future? Like how is our portfolio of products going to intersect in the future? Maybe you're thinking about like a huge new initiative that is going to have, cross product, like huge impact, huge potential for either success or risk. You're working on some of the highest level projects at the company. So, huge risk, huge reward. But it takes a long time to get there. And that's why I'm not really stressed. A lot of the people I know who are at this level have been working in design for like 20 years. A lot of them are hugely influential people, and that can either be in the industry or within the company. Maybe they've been working at the company for a long time. So these are just a couple of real human beings who are at that level. So on the left is like people you've probably seen on LinkedIn, Val Head, Pavel Samsonov, Gina Ann. Those are like real principal designers. There's people you may have also seen who are kind of like sitting in the middle, who maybe they post sometimes and they do some talks. And then there are people on the right who like I've worked with in various capacities over time, and you maybe don't really see them post. They post like maybe like once every like 5 years on LinkedIn if they have to, but they're really well known within the company and they've made major impact internally. So there's different ways to be a principal designer. I just want to shout out like Val Head, for example, literally is on the World Wide Web Commission, like the thing that like makes CSS and things like that. Like she's like written books about CSS animations and like has directly influenced how that works. Like that's the level that we're talking about. Like Gina Ann literally helped create the concept of design tokens. Like these are people who are just like wild. And so you can either decide to go in that direction where you're making like industry-wide impact, or you can like, I know some principal designers who have just worked at a company since like almost the founding, like they were one of the first designers there, and it's been like 10, 15 years. And over time, they've just accumulated so much knowledge, and they know so much about that particular product or suite of products that they have such a high level of influence in the company, and they can work directly with the CEO pretty much whenever the person wants. So it really depends. I think if you are looking to one day go beyond staff and get to principal, my number one piece of advice would be to learn to handle ambiguity, because there's so much of it at both the staff level and at the principal level. At principal, you're pretty much most of the time not going to be directly shipping work unless maybe there's like a huge strategic fire that is like more immediately important. But a lot of times, from what I've witnessed, you're working on initiatives that might take years to make change. Like literally, you're thinking about like what is the future of the business model of the company. Like eventually, it will actually be implemented, but it's going to be a long time where you're just not actually seeing your work touch users. And that is something that you have to be comfortable with. And you have to figure out how do you organize people and build confidence and route yourself when you don't exactly know how anything is going to fully land. So you have to figure out how to orient yourself when nobody's telling you how to do that. And so that's what I mean when I say like learn to crunch ambiguity. Even as a staff designer, I am constantly figuring out, well, what don't I know? What do I know? How do we get the answers for what we don't know? And how do I form a perspective when nobody is really telling me what to do next? Like I have to use the kit of tools that I have built over time to figure out for myself and for my team what the next thing we can do is to actually start to have an idea of what's going on. And you have to be comfortable with that because it's really uncomfortable most of the time. We essentially need these kinds of people. So over time, these kinds of positions are only going to be more valuable, in my opinion, as products get more complex, as we need more people who can think critically and help us see the future and game out decisions. Like I think obviously we're in a time right now where everybody thinks that like you can do that just by like typing something into Lovable, but like the reality is, and I said this to my PM the other day, my PM sent me this adorable prototype and he was like, "What do you think of this?" And I was like, "Well, there's like 7 different hypotheses in this, and at least 2 of them conflict with like what we've agreed on in the past. And like, I'm down to do some of these, but like, let's like break down what the actual ideas are here." And I think through that, you know, my PM was like, "Oh, okay, this is actually like way more complex than just like me making prototype." And like me making prototype is totally fun and fine sometimes. But when you get to this level of complexity where you're thinking about end-to-end workflows, for example, you want to use those skills that we've built over time to help people make informed decisions and propose and advocate for what you think is the best decision. And that is essentially how you win at the staff level. I think it's how we show the value of design in the world that we are in now. And I think it's how you eventually go from staff to principal. I hope that makes sense. If you are ready to talk about this more, we'll open for Q&A in a second, but I would love to keep the conversation going, and there are a couple of ways that we can do that. So I am running a course on this in July that's called Staff Designer. It is going to be a whole bunch of this and a lot more stuff. So I will post a link to my page on Maven in general if you want to just like see all the like nerdy stuff that I get up to, including that workshop that I mentioned before. But essentially, we're going to be talking about this in a lot more detail. We're going to talk about executive stakeholder communication, influencing design and product strategy, expectation setting with collaborators. So a little bit of what I alluded to today. As I mentioned, it's 5 weeks. We're going to have a bunch of live time and a social mixer. So if you want to connect with other people who are at the senior or staff level, it's a great opportunity to connect with a lot of cool people. And it's usually very cathartic. I think that when people are trying to figure out like what is next, what do I do, just having other people who are at that same point in time in itself is a really beautiful time. So yes, UX researchers can also join. We've had content designers as well. So anybody who feels like they are in the UX practitioner space usually finds value in the conversations. And it, you know, like there's parts where we talk about craft, and like there's always a type of craft that UX practitioners are doing. It just kind of varies. So like content designers do word nerd stuff. UX researchers have conversations about how they research and how do you actually gather valuable insights, for example. So like they're all, I think like the important thing is how to essentially like build influence when you don't actually have power. And that's what we are talking about a ton. If you want to say 15% on the course, you can do that with the code Philly Kai. So that should work, and it should be good for basically the next month. So that's there. And then obviously the book's also here. So hopefully you win the book. But if you also just want to get the book, you can also save 20% with code Philly Kai. And yeah, it's going to have some overlap with the course, but obviously in the course, you actually get to talk to lots of people. The book has lots of interviews also that dig a lot deeper into certain topics that we just don't have the time for during those 5 weeks. and there's like a lot more reflections, and all the interviews that I mentioned before. So if you want to read those interviews, and like get all the like side narrative and deep thoughts and fun drawings that I did in the book, you can also do that. And with that, I will open us up to questions. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to read off a question for you that was way earlier in the chat from Olivia. She wanted to know, she said, I would think that at the senior level, you would still need to have deep understanding of the strategic plan or vision of the design, even as a junior. But it sounds like at the staff designer level, your primary responsibility is to communicate and be accountable if things go wrong. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I do think that you're like there's a difference between like the staff designer and the manager. So the manager is like very operational focused usually, and they're like thinking about like, does everybody have what they need to deliver? The staff designer is usually accountable for like the quality of the final output and for collaborating with the manager to say what we're actually working on. Obviously, they're also collaborating with like a PM as well, and like engineering lead, et cetera. So usually there's like a series of people who are in the room defining that strategy. And then after the strategy is agreed upon, then yes, the staff designer is accountable for the quality of the actual work. So in my day to day, for example, if I'm like the strategic design lead for a particular project that we've agreed that we are going to work on that I helped define, then if somebody else is, like another designer, like a senior designer is working with me, I'm probably pairing with that person. I'm going to be in crit and I'm going to be providing feedback to that person. If something looks wonky that that person does, somebody's going to come to me and be like, "Hey, Kat, did you see this? Did you say that this was fine?" And so ultimately, I'm accountable for the output. If that person is having like performance, quote unquote, issues where they're not meeting deadlines or like agreed upon dates, and it's like a repeated issue, then that would be like the design manager's responsibility. But yeah, like I am ultimately accountable for like the quality bar essentially and like upholding that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you. Makes total sense. Um, it sounds like the manager, the functional manager is more so like the people or the team, and then you're dealing with the deliverable, um, or approving it, and or are you also working on it a lot as well?
Yeah, like I'm still shipping work. I'm usually taking off like the more ambiguous, confusing chunks of work for the project. So like, let me think of an example. Like, when we were working at SoundCloud, there was I was a senior designer at that time. There was this huge initiative to like create a new subscription product, and so there was a designer who was essentially the staff designer looking across the entire end-to-end experience of that subscription product. So there was like a part of it that was about how like musicians consented to participating in it, how subscribers could pay for it, and then what the listening experience was like once you paid for it. There was somebody who was overseeing all of that. She took on like a big chunk of that work and was thinking about mostly like what's the listening experience going to be like, because that was what the company cared about more for that project, was like the listener experience. And like she wanted to define some of the more hairy details of like how that was going to work on that side. And then she basically like cut off chunks of that work, and I was specifically, for example, assigned what it was going to be like to check out. And we had like existing checkout experiences, so it wasn't like that new, or like there were parts of it that were like not overly complex for me at the time, but it was enough for me to kind of like think about like, okay, based on what we have, like how is this going to be different? Where are we trying to go with the design direction? Oh, like that person had some opinions about that, so I'll take her work and then kind of figure out, how does this fit into that? And then I would share my work with her, and she would be looking across all the designers who are working on all of the different pieces and making sure that together they fit into something that made more sense. Awesome. Um, do we want to do a live question or?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it looks like Olive's raising their hand. Do you want to speak out?
Yeah. Oh, can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can
Yeah.
you hear me now? Hi.
Yes.
Awesome. Congratulations on your 3 years. Awesome anniversary. Um, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing this call. My name is Olive, obviously. I am a UX designer with Accenture. So my perspective is a little bit different. I'm kind of trying to figure out like the levels and structures of different companies. And every company has different responsibilities and what their titles are. So I guess I was wondering like from senior designer to staff designer, like what is this what's the size of the group that you work with? Like, is it just like the higher you go up, is it just you, or are you working with like a team? Like, what does that look like and decisioning and making those decisions every day?
Yeah. Definitely depends on the size of the company. And I have like a whole section in the book that's just about like, okay, like depending on what company you're at, like this will be different. Essentially, like you will you're gonna end up working with more people the higher up you generally go. How many people there are is definitely dependent on the scale of the company. So like a really small company, a company that has like 99 or less people, you're
Mhm.
gonna have like it's gonna be like probably just you and like the founders and maybe like a couple product managers or whatever. But then if you are at a company that's got like 3,000 people, then, maybe you are responsible for the design of a specific area. And then it's probably going to be you, the design managers for like each area,
Okay.
any designers that are working hands-on on specific, areas that like, or sections that kind of fit within that area. So like there's usually like a hands-on designer who's like responsible for like a smaller chunk, like a specific team, like several pods potentially. So you'll have like it kind of starts to fan out depending on the size of the company that you're working under. So for example, at Asana, they were about 1,500 people. I was in this one area where like essentially like we built our own product called Goals. And so it's like a goal management product that kind of lived over here. There was like the task management stuff that was kind of in a different area. But we like occasionally would go collaborate with those people because like essentially like the way that the product worked is you had these different objects and they all had to connect to each other at certain points. And so I was working on goal management. I had like another designer that I was collaborating directly with, but then I was working across, at one point I was working with 5 different teams that each had their own product manager and their own engineering squads. And so it just got really complicated. And at one point, yeah, like we had at least 5 or 6 designers that I was like coordinating with and trying to like roll out. This was when we were trying to launch this particular product area. Um, yeah, I was like talking to a lot of people and like coordinating with a lot of teams. Again, like I had a product partner who was doing the same thing that I was doing. So I was mostly talking to designers and occasionally coordinating with, engineers. And like my PM was mostly talking to like their PM partners across or like their peers. And then essentially we would have meetings occasionally with like directors and make sure that they were aware of what was going on. And we were like presenting upward, to leadership. So like maybe, for example, like the head of product, we had to give an update like once every 2 weeks. And like I think we had to present to like the CEO like 1 or 2 times, like just to kind of like let him know like, hey, we're doing this big launch and like does this generally look fine?
Mhm.
But yeah, most of the time as a staff designer, I'm still working with like product managers and like people who are at the people management level and like you're accountable to directors for like the quality of the work and making sure that like they agree with the decisions that you're making.
Okay.
um, but yeah, a lot of your work still kind of feels, generally UX or product designy. It's just like the scope of impact gets bigger over time. So you have more people that you're talking to and coordinating with. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. It sounds like, well, synopsis, it's like you are still doing product UX work, but it's like you're, yeah, so you're still doing the work, but you're kind of like spread out amongst like different orgs and, like your web is bigger, I guess,
Yeah.
is what it sounds like. Okay,
Yes.
cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, it takes time. Like
Yeah.
over time, you will take on more complicated problems, and then it'll
Yeah.
start to feel more familiar, and you'll learn more techniques that help you to route yourself when you're facing ambiguity. Because when you're a staff designer, people are going to be like asking you questions, and you're going to sometimes be like, whoa, why are you looking at me for decisions? Like, I don't know either. And you just have to figure out
Figure it
how to
together.
orient yourself. Yeah.
Oh wow. I mean, that's encouraging too. That's really encouraging because it's like, yeah, it just seems like it depends, but also in a good way. Like there's hope. You'll eventually figure it out. But that's awesome that they put confidence in you. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Let's see. I'm gonna read Steven's question. So, yes, can you share how you mentor senior designers, any tactics or methodologies that you use to mentor senior designers on the team? I definitely do a fair amount of mentorship in a couple different ways. So one of the ways is I'll have like a one-to-one with the senior designers on my team and most of the designers on my team at least like every 2 weeks, we'll have a 30-minute one-to-one. During that time, they'll either bring a problem that they want to jam on, and we do like direct pairing together, or they will ask questions that are more like career oriented. And so that's like a big thing that I do. I do also occasionally, if somebody just reaches out to me internally and says, hey, like, can we just can you just be my mentor? Like I've also done that, and that's also cool. So sometimes people who are on different teams will just want to talk to me, and we'll do like 30 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour, at least like once every 2 weeks. Also, sometimes I do once a month, and it's 1 hour long for sure. And it's like a at least a quarterly kind of mentorship process. Usually I try to focus again, like I try not to do too much like people managery type stuff. So usually our conversations are more about like how do you handle like a particular design problem, but sometimes I will coach people on like communication and things like that. I like to show a little bit more than I like to tell people, because what I'm trying to do is like help them build confidence in their own ability to, again, like handle ambiguity and to like route themselves when they're facing a problem, because like that is, again, like the mindset shift that has to happen as they're like moving from senior to staff. So yeah, like we've talked a lot about like building confidence. I've worked with people on like executive presence type things, how to show up even though you're like kind of introverted, things like that. I think, yeah, like my number one recommendation to people is usually to try to ask questions more than you like tell people what to do. So what I mean by that is like if somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, like I'm having this like issue where like my PM won't listen to the ideas that I have, then I might ask like, oh, well, what have you tried? And I'll try to like ask, several questions to kind of understand. And then usually through that, we can figure out like, oh, this is the particular thing that's happening. And if it were, then I kind of shift into like, well, if it were me, I would probably try some of these things. Have you thought about this, that? So yeah, it's usually like a workshopping kind of conversation. And I think that's how I also approach like jamming and pair designing. So yeah, usually I'm like trying to see like what have you tried, what haven't you tried, and I'm trying to expand their thinking. So if it's the hands-on design work, yeah, it's like how do I show them how I work so that they can start to expand their thinking. If it's more like communication coaching or something like that, then yeah, I'm usually like asking them questions. Um, and trying to figure out like what have they like how are they thinking about this and like how can we expand their thinking in that way too. I hope that makes sense and that answered your question about mentorship. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering this. I think that totally makes sense. I think one thing you mentioned is really beautiful is I think I have been through this period where when I mentor or being the mentee in the conversation where my coach asking questions. And in addition to what you described, one of the learnings I found out from that conversation is that sometimes we would find answers through our own answers. and then that will solve our problems actually. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar to like in engineering, there's a concept called rubber ducking where like sometimes you literally just need to talk to somebody and kind of like work through your own thoughts. And like the person who's facilitating the conversation obviously is like an expert or whatever, but like you have the answer. And again, it's about building your own confidence that you can help yourself in that way. And like I'm always happy to be a thought partner to people as they're figuring out how to do that. Let's see. Question from Samantha. Any advice or experience advocating for scaling the team from a perspective of a staff designer? Oh, yeah. Uh, when I was working on goals at Asana, actually, this happened basically like we temporarily had support from these other teams, and then the support went away, but we still had a lot of work to do. And so this is also something like I do kind of talk some about, but essentially like what usually will happen is that you need to be documenting all the work that is not happening because there is not more support. And you need to not fill those gaps. So you usually what I do is that I will say, you know, I have, this many hours outside of the meetings that I have, and I'm going to be optimizing for the highest impact. And this is my thinking about what that is. These are all the things that I can't get to because we don't have enough support. And so if we do want to do these things, like I'm down to like I think we could go, maybe grab this person for like 3 months and do a rotation. Like we could get a contractor maybe. I know that we don't have headcount. Like you could help kind of explore what the options are. And that's essentially what I did. So I flagged, hey, like we want to do this huge initiative. So we wanted to like do like multiple really big strategic efforts after we rolled out goals at Asana and we just didn't have people. And so I was like, okay, well, I can take one because like I just like don't have the ability to context switch to that level. Like I can take on one big strategic project and then one like quick win at a time and kind of like piecemeal the quick wins out as I'm like thinking through the bigger one. But like we have two really big strategic projects and that's just going to be like a ridiculous amount of context switching that's going to result in terrible quality work and nobody's going to be happy. So if you want that, then like rotate a person in or like hire a contractor or something. And then ultimately, me and my PM worked together to present a roadmap that illustrated that we needed more support in general, longer term. And so we ultimately were able to advocate successfully for additional headcount for the team. But yeah, it's going to be a long-term effort. And essentially, you need to keep those receipts, as Gina said. You need to not fill in the gaps so that the pain is felt by leadership. And you need to, again, make it clear you are delivering and it's not a personal fault of your own. It's just that you're not being set up to succeed and you don't have to like express that in like an angry way to them. It's just more like factually, like if you want these things, uh, there's only a certain amount of time in the day. And like maybe there are other negotiations that you can play with, like, oh, well, like, maybe we can like vibe code this, like what quality level do we need this at? Like that can be part of the conversation too. But yeah, ultimately you got to figure out like what your ask is. And then like it's gonna probably take a little bit longer than you think for it to happen. So the other thing is just to have some patience because it might be 3 to 6 months of like discomfort. Hope that makes sense.
No, thank you. That was really helpful. I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you for asking. Let's see. JL asked, as a generalization, does your toolkit change more from hard skills, which is software, to more soft skills, influence as you move up the ladder? I do think that the foundational, like fundamental communication skills is a huge differentiator. And I say that because there are going to be a handful of like really talented designers who are just like at the right place at the right time and just build so much influence through just being like the longest time employee, you know? But that's so rare that you're able to be that person. And so, unless you're that lucky human being who can just coast on your technical skills as a designer, you're probably going to have to be a really strong communicator because you're going to have to be able to get dropped into lots of situations where you can build strong relationships and trust with people. So I highly recommend investing in that because it's more often than not going to be the thing that gets in your way unless you are that lucky person. So yeah, I think like conflict resolution, like listening and figuring out how to like actually find the person, like people's fears and like their goals and their motivations, things like that. Those are so critical. So if you're at a company where you've been there for like 2 years or something like that, that is going to be the thing that usually blocks you from getting a staff promo. Um, but yeah, if you work at a small startup and you're just there for like 10 years, then maybe you can just like coast on hard skills. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to take the lack of follow-up question as an this is cool. Um, okay, let's see. Jane said, are you working with other staff designers, or is the org set in a way where each team or product includes only one staff designer, and thus you're working with more senior and design managers in your team and really with other staff designers? It depends. So sometimes I have worked with other staff designers, and that is usually when my area needs to overlap with some other area, and we have to coordinate together to figure out a shared decision that's going to affect both of us. And so that does happen at times. Usually, I would say more often than not, I am kind of like mostly in my like corner. I mean, it really depends on the project though. I can't say that like it will happen. There have been lots of times where I've had to consult other staff designers, and there was work that I was working on that touched their areas. So I would say sometimes you'll end up in situations where like there's a horizontal staff designer who thinks about a particular concept across the product, and then there's you, and you work on a particular like vertical, like a specific product area or like a specific product within the portfolio. And so like say if you're working on a new product and you need somebody to like somebody else owns like access control, for example, if you're at Asana and you are working on like a new thing that needs some kind of permissioning, then you have to go consult the staff designer who works on like the concept of access control, for example. And so you will end up in these situations where you are like consulting these people. Maybe there's like one product that like somehow intersects at a certain point with another product and you need to handshake. That's another situation where there's probably another designer who's like leading that other area and you've got to figure that out. So I think it really depends on the demands of the work. But ultimately, you will have to occasionally build alignment with other designers. And in those cases, I usually at the beginning of the project will just ask, like, how would you like to work together? And that's again where the communication part comes in. So you have to figure out what your norms are and like how you want to collaborate. And then once you agree on like who makes what decisions about what, then you can usually figure out how you want to move forward. So I usually recommend to define who the, ultimately responsible decision maker is for certain things. But yeah, like be ready for pretty much any combination of people to happen at any point. Thanks for the question, Jane. Okay, JL, where do you see UX creativity the most, at the lower levels or brainstorming behind closed rooms? I mean, I think it's happening at all levels in different ways. Like, of course, interaction design wise, like you're going to see lots of cool things happening like closer to the ground, but like when you start zooming out, and you can tell me if I'm misinterpreting this, but essentially, like when you zoom out, you just start to think about so many other kinds of complexities that like open up so much more. So, at the staff level, it might be like literally like conceptually, what is a goal and like how do you display that in a product and like how do you like what does it mean to have an experience that's like motivating for people and like how do we create that feeling through interaction design. Like I think that's cool. And I think you can be really creative with that. But yeah, I think like you can kind of be creative at like pretty much any layer. I think when you get to principal level and it's like, what is the future of our business model? Like that's also really cool. It's just like a bit far out for me personally. So I think like I like the staff level because I still feel like I'm doing a lot of like, ooh, interaction design. Like we can play with the information so much. But the level above that, I'm kind of like, it's just not hitting for me the same way at this moment. But yeah, I have so much respect for the people that I work with who are at that level. And I mean, a lot of them unlock the ability for people to do so much. So I feel like it's again creativity in a different way. Um, AI assisted workflows. So I think like I alluded to this a little bit. I think in some ways it can speed you up. In some ways it can be really interruptive. Um, I think it's really important to figure out like a lot of the job is like making meaning of things. And so if you're in a situation where you need to find patterns, like it can be really helpful. And I do sometimes use it to shortcut like I need to make a prototype of this particular idea. I have like a really clear perspective on what this thing needs to be. Can you just like take these screens and just like do that for me? Like that can be really helpful. But if you're like at the beginning of a project and it's not just a question of like, what's all the research we've ever done on this particular problem? Like that's useful. But sometimes like having it be more like, can you just like design 5 screens for me of this particular thing? It's gonna be maybe a little bit middling. So if you're trying, like I would use it for things where you're like summarizing data, you're generating like customer feedback, you have an idea and you know, you just want something to like make it for you really quickly, like that kind of stuff. I think it's great for. I try not to use it for things where like I need to be critically thinking, because I think like it looks usually it presents something that looks fine, but then like when you actually sit with it for a while, it doesn't quite it's not quite there. But yeah, I'm honestly still playing with it as well. Like, yeah, we've got like Chat GPT and stuff like that at work and like we're figuring it out. Um, but yeah, like I think pattern matching, it's really good for things like that. Critical thinking, I don't quite feel that way about it. Um, and then last, Sharona, do you feel that as a, or find that as a staff designer, you deal with a lot of cross-product strategy, or does that vary per company and role? Yeah, I would say there's most likely going to be some element of like thinking about how your area affects other people, or other product areas. And it's like encouraged to consider that because that ends up scaling your impact personally. So yeah, I would say that another thing that tends to distinguish a senior design or staff designer from a senior one is that the staff designer is like proactively considering like what other areas could, you know, my work be implemented into to like make, you know, bigger impact, or be more helpful, to customers, to the team, et cetera. So there are going to be moments where I don't know if you ever had this moment where you're like, well, I could go and like do this extra thinking about how this work could work over here, but that's like not my job. That's like outside the scope of my team. So I'm gonna just stop here. Like that's actually the moment where you could decide to show that you are able to do that kind of thinking. And I've certainly remember having those moments before and then later seeing like other people take it and push it. Um, and like Micah, who I like quoted once, like she did that and she got rewarded for that. She actually took, nobody was working on permissioning, honestly, at Asana for a little bit, and she took that on. And she decided to like propose what better permissioning could look like. And yeah, like ultimately she ended up getting put into she had more influence after that and like people kept talking about it for a while. So yeah, I would recommend that because those are those moments where you can kind of step up. It is definitely above the pay grade, so I would be strategic about when you do it, and I would think about like how often is this something that people are frustrated that they don't have, for example. And like permissioning was something that kept coming up over and over and over and over again. And we were like, oh man, like nobody has the time for this. And then she just made a working group and like, you know, ran a workshop and like helped us kind of figure out like, oh, what could we do here? And then she started like pitching that to leadership. And I huge hats off to Micah because she really showed me in that moment, like I could be doing a little bit more of that. But yeah, that's something that I would suggest thinking about. And again, be strategic about how you use your energy with that. Cool. Well, I think those are all the questions. I will pass to Hannah unless we have anybody else, or Jamie, I saw you on mute as well.
Well, I just want to pop one. I think one that got like lost way up there. Spencer asked a while ago. And correct me if this was already answered. They asked, how have you collaborated with other senior design colleagues, like directors? Any takeaways? Imagine there's a lot of crossover.
Yes, yeah, great question. So, a lot of times with directors and senior managers, usually at the beginning of our collaboration, we will discuss how we want to work together. So, some managers and directors want to be more involved in strategy, which we're seeing more as of late, of course, because of the great flattening. But essentially, usually they want to have some level of input into the strategy itself. And usually we try to agree that, they're coming to it from the perspective of like, how is this going to affect how our team is staffed and like who's on what work? And so like I will often consult a design manager, as we are, of course, like discussing our strategic priorities and like what our roadmap is going to look like in conversation, of course, with the PM as well. And then once we've agreed on what the roadmap's going to look like, then my question to the director is like, okay, how does this align with your broader vision for like where we're going in this area? And usually the director will either be responsible for like other people on the team, or we'll have a senior manager that the director, will report to. And they will essentially, the senior manager will be thinking about like, okay, how do we assign people to all of the work? So that's kind of like the senior manager's portion. The director usually has like other projects that they're paying attention to at the same time, and they want to understand how everything's going to like kind of map, like kind of like handshake together, and like align. And so then I'm usually like working with that person to understand what they're hearing across the organization and to get their feedback and to make sure that I'm moving in the direction that they're hoping that the product goes into over time. And then to your question, Olive, about what the great flattening is, that was and is still like the there's like been kind of a reduction in the number of layers in the reporting chain. So a lot of designers are now finding that they are reporting directly to directors versus like maybe a senior manager or a manager. And so that's what I meant by the great flattening, is that managers are now trying to show more value other than the like kind of like human aspect of the job. And so it's not just about how long you retain your employees or like how quick their output is. A lot of times managers now want to also provide strategic influence. And so you will often have to converse with them about like how you want to work together. Because if you don't have that conversation, then they might start trying to land grab, and like essentially you may end up in a conflict about who's making the final strategic decision. So I try to check with that person and just see like, you know, how can I involve you in the conversation, and like how much do you care about certain strategic decisions, so that we can like align up front on how we want to work together. So they are a thought partner for me a lot of the time, in the work that I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for the wonderful questions. And of course, a huge, huge thank you for Kat for being here today and delivering such a wonderful, informative presentation. So thank you so much, Kat. Really wonderful conversations happening here. I'll go ahead and quickly share my screen. So very excited to announce the randomized raffle winner for tonight. So the person receiving a copy of the Staff Designer is Jillian. So thank you so much, Jillian, and everyone else here for sticking around for the whole event. And yeah, thank you again so much, Kat. We will share information after this after the event on like the Philly Kai code and everything. But we really appreciate your time. So give a virtual round of applause to Kat. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much everyone again for being here. If you're interested in staying connected, we do have like an online community if you're interested in joining like future virtual events like this. So we have a Discord right here. Feel free to follow us on Instagram. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Kat.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kat. Really appreciate it. All right, I'll go ahead and close out the Zoom. But yeah, if anyone, I'll just leave it for one more minute. If anyone wants to go ahead and join our community, or has any like further questions for Kat, we'll also send out her LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, and the workshop link for her workshop's also in the chat now again. So a couple people wanted that.
Alrighty, awesome. Okay, closing up right now. But yeah, thank you so much again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Bye.
You. Bye.